So, qualitative data analysis. Now, what are the contents for today's session? We'll be looking at what is qualitative research, the process of qualitative research, concepts and codes. So, what is qualitative research? Let's start with the introduction. Collecting information which researchers call data is only the beginning of research process. So it's not the end of it, it's just the start, because what follows is the detailed analysis of your data, complemented by the discussion and implications of your research and the conclusion that you draw from that particular qualitative research or the data, be it quantitative, be it qualitative. Once that you have collected the information, it has to be organized and thought about. Now, quantitative analysis uses data to provide answers which can be expressed numerically. However, in qualitative research, which this paper or this study discusses or this webinar discusses, is more concerned with the meaning of the data. Rather than assessing the data numerically, in qualitative research, you are more interested in the meaning of the data as to what it means. Data is a word which describes valid information that can help a researcher answer his or her questions. It can come from many different sources. So your data can it can come from customers, it can come from organization, it can come from employees, it can come from community, general public, or any other person, group of people that can provide relevant information or data or answers to your questions. Notes, observation, interview tapes, survey, questionnaire, all and transcripts are all sources of your data. Now, what is or how quantitative research compares to qualitative research? Before I get down to the differences, let me give you an example. For instance, if I ask you a question, rate your level of satisfaction with the university that you studied in the last time from 1 to 10. So my question is, rate your level of satisfaction from the university you last studied in from 1 to 10. Now, in this particular question, what I have done is I have limited your response to a range of numbers from 1 to 10. And if I want to measure your satisfaction, you can only express your satisfaction in numbers from 1 to 10, where 1 is least satisfied and 10 is most satisfied. Now, the limitation of this kind of question is that you cannot express your satisfaction in greater detail. You might say that, yes, I am satisfied with the teaching, but I'm not satisfied with the administrative staff. You can say that I'm satisfied with the resources provided, but I'm not satisfied within the resources. I'm satisfied with the computer lab, but I'm not satisfied with the library. You do not have this liberty in quantitative research. So you cannot associate meaning to the data in greater detail. But in qualitative research, my question would change. And my question would be like, express your level of satisfaction with the university you last studied in. Now, here you have an open playing field where you can explain your level of satisfaction. What is your level of satisfaction? Why is this your level of satisfaction? What are the key contributors to your level of satisfaction? So, your explanation is through words. In quantitative research, your explanation is through numbers. In quantitative research, it's more objective. So if I take a mean for say 300 respondents, the mean would be same if I take it from any software or whosoever takes it. But in qualitative research, my analysis of the responses would be different to the analysis of someone else, maybe in the same university. So the analysis is subjective. In quantitative research, it's deductive reasoning. You actually answer the questions or achieve the objectives of your study by proposing hypotheses. Whereas in qualitative research, it's not the theory testing, it's actually deriving or proposing a theory, inductive reasoning. You've got predefined variables and measurement in quantitative research, whereas in qualitative research, it's extraneous variables or creativity. You might create new variables. You do not have predefined variables. You may get new variables as you move in, as you analyze your data. In quantitative research, data collection is done before the analysis. So you have to complete your data collection once you think of going towards the analysis. Whereas in qualitative research, the data collection and analysis is intervened or intertwined. What you do is you collect the data and you keep on analyzing the data as you go along and collect the data. And this actually can take us to the sampling process of qualitative research. In qualitative research, you actually stop collecting data once there is very little or no variance is left once you are collecting data. So you're not getting anything new out of the interviews or focus group discussions or surveys or maybe any method that you are using to collect the data. So it's the same old coming in. People are saying the same old thing that others have said. So you stop collecting the data. In quantitative research, we are primarily focused on cause and effect, relationships. That's why we use regression or correlation. In qualitative research, we are focused on assigning description or meaning to what people have said. So, what are my interview questions? One of the problems that I have witnessed during the course of qualitative research that people actually encounter is that they do not have the right interview questions asked. What they do is they actually fail to understand that how your interview questions or from where your interview questions come. The first thing that you should do is in any kind of research, be it quantitative, be it qualitative, it should be to develop an understanding of stakeholder perception of university social responsibility. This is one of the purpose. So the first thing is that you should develop a clear, concise, concrete research purpose. So what is the aim of your research? What is it that you want to do through this research? What is the purpose of your research? It has to be very clear, concise, concrete, and complete. In this case, the example is to develop an understanding of stakeholder perception of university social responsibility. So, how do stakeholders understand and perceive university social responsibility? The research question based on this purpose is what are the characteristics, attributes of university social responsibility? How do stakeholders attribute university social responsibility? What do they think that are the key characteristics of university social responsibility? Now, in order to complement this research question, you have to draft your interview questions or questions or interview protocol for your focus group discussion. In this case, what I did for my study was that I drafted 7 questions, 7 interview questions. The first one was asking, what do they think? What is social responsibility to them? What do you think is social responsibility of a university? What do you think are the main determinants of a university social responsibility? Is your university socially responsible? Provide reasons. What do you think university should be? Why do you think, universities should be socially responsible? What responsibility does the university has towards its faculty member or students? What do you think are the characteristics of a university that is socially responsible? You might think that some of the questions seem repetitive. Well, the reason I do this is that if I ask the same question and they think that this is the same question, they normally mention that okay, it's the same as you asked earlier. But sometimes there is a repetition because they might understand one question better than the other. So it's the wording, just to give them the space to answer, since you need their responses to analyze. So what is the analysis process? Analysis describes an iterative process, something that you do again and again, as to how to go from messy data, something you've got like 10, 20, 30 interviews. Now, how do you actually make this data make sense? How do you code it? How do you draft themes from this? So the process actually involves the following steps. First, and really important, do not jump to analysis of the data. Familiarize yourself with your data. How do you familiarize yourself with your data? Read the interview transcripts. If you haven't got the interview transcripts yet and you've got the recording, hear the recording again and again. So you know what you are hearing to. So you know what you've got in your head. Maybe reading it twice or thrice or four times would be a good idea. And this way you would be able to map the whole process or map the whole data in your mind. You will be able to understand, okay, these things I see that everyone has talked about these things. These events, these issues, these problems, these participants or these factors, everybody is talking about these. And then while you are reading them or while you are talking about them or while you are discussing them or while you are hearing about these things, what you can do is, and in your mind, this is how the mind will work in qualitative research. In your mind, you'll be actually combining different factors into categories, or you may call them themes. And this is why this is very important, to familiarize yourself with your data. Without this, your whole process will get flawed and you will have trouble doing this analysis. And I have personally tested this process. Before I go for my analysis of qualitative data, what I do is I read my interview transcripts or recordings at least 3 to 4 times, just to know these are the questions I asked and these are the responses. So I know, okay, these are the responses that are critical to answering my research question. And these are the responses where respondents actually did not provide adequate information. So I can negate these responses maybe. Organize the data, and we'll be looking at how to organize the data soon. So you actually bring your data together, bring the data together. After, obviously, once you have familiarized yourself with the data, you can actually remove something that you think it's actually does not answer any of the questions, or the interviewer, or sorry, the interviewee did not answer the questions in the right manner. Assign preliminary code to your data in order to describe the content. How do you assign these preliminary codes? How does this coding process work? We'll be looking into in a greater detail at this. Search for patterns or themes. You can group the codes together to identify themes in your interviews. Name and define themes. This is very important. How do you name them? How do you define them? We'll be looking at that as well. And relate the themes together. Do not just like identify the themes or codes without identifying the relationship between these codes and themes. This is a very wrong manner in which we normally do our analysis of qualitative data. So you need to bring the themes together, relate them so that they can come together in and actually serve the purpose, or achieve the purpose of your research. And finding possible and plausible explanation for your findings. So you have to now discuss the results. This is again very important. How do you find plausible explanation for your findings? Go back to the literature, go back to the theory. Now, how do you familiarize yourself with the data? We'll be focusing on analyzing data from one-to-one individual interviews, focus group discussion, and that is one of the example in this particular session. So now that you've got the data, start the analysis process by getting to know your data. How do you get to know the data? Read the data or read the interviews if you've got the transcripts. Listen to it if you've got it in audio, at least 2 to 3 times, so that you know, okay, this is what I've got in my head. And while you are listening, you'll be able to identify, okay, these are the patterns, or this is a particular pattern emerging in the data. These are the particular issues, these are the particular codes, themes, issues, problems that are coming in the data. So it's very important that you actually focus on these things. Read your data, or read your interviews rather. Moving on. Organize the data. Now, how do you organize the data? While you are reading through it, it's obviously, if you are listening to it, it's better to transcribe the data, always a good idea. But if you do not have the means to transcribe the data, you will have to hear it all over again and again. But it's always a good idea to transcribe. The best way to organize your data is to go back to your interview guide. What questions did you ask? Who did you ask these questions? What were their responses? What were the key ideas that actually emerged from those responses? Do you want to take any notes? It's always a good idea to take notes or make comments, because obviously while you are reading through it, ideas will come to your mind. You will think, okay, these themes could emerge from these particular responses. So it's always a good idea to take notes. Now, assign preliminary codes. How do you assign preliminary codes? Now, what is actually coding? A code is a qualitative inquiry, is most often a word or a short phrase or that symbolically assign a summative, salient, a sense capturing and or evocative attribute for a portion of the data. What is a code? Actually, a code is a word. It's a short phrase that you assign to a particular sentence, a particular issue, a particular problem, a particular concept, a particular event from your qualitative data. For example, or actually we'll be looking at examples later, so just let's go through this text first. Now, what you are doing through coding is you are actually indexing or categorizing the text in order to establish a framework of thematic ideas. So you cannot establish themes unless or until you code your data, unless or until you identify critical aspects in your qualitative interviews or your interviews. So coding is a way of identifying critical aspects, the information that is very necessary, something that will lead to your discussion, something that is will add to attainment of the purpose of your study. In qualitative research, coding is how you define what the data you are analyzing is about or are about. Coding is the process of identifying a passage in the text, searching and identifying concepts and finding relationship between them. It's not just that you highlight, okay, these things are important. Coding is not just identifying these aspects are important, or these 3 4 passages from these 2 3 respondents actually relate to, say, ethical aspects of university, or these 3 4 passages relate to community engagement of a university. It's about finding relationship between those passages as well, between those codes as well. Therefore, coding is not just labeling of the text, it's about linking the data to the research idea and back to the other data. The codes which are applied enable you to organize the data. So coding is a method to organize the data so you can examine and analyze them in a very structured way. And for start, how do you define your codes, or how can you define your codes? For starters, what you can do is you may develop codes based on your interview questions. So you've got interview questions and you think that, okay, these are the aspects that I've asked for in my interviews. So you can look into those aspects, but do not limit your coding to your interview questions. How to avoid this? Read or listen to your interviews. Now, what to do? Read the whole text maybe over and over. Now, how do you code? Read it again and again. I've said this, or hear it again and again. See what it says. What is it about? Why is it this important? You are reading through it and you think that this particular text may be important because obviously this particular text talks about what is the purpose of your research, or this particular text is a key feature as to the question that was asked. Are there any similarities? A text relevant to a particular concept, issue, or event. So you highlight the particular concept, the particular issue, the particular event. Now, why? How do you know that this particular concept, issue, or event is important? If this particular concept, issue, or event is related to your overall research question or the purpose of research. Can I group the concepts, issues, or events? And if you can group them together or identify a code for them, that is very good. Are there any keywords? This is very important. While you are reading through your text, while you are reading through your interviews or listening to them, you'll find that there are particular words that are being repeated by each of the interview. So those are your keywords. And then you can use these softwares that we are going to use later for automatic coding. Retrieve all text that use these particular words. So it will save you time. Review. Are any codes reappearing? Could they be combined? This is particularly important. And yes, the codes will reappear because that's the primary purpose. You have to identify this is something deliberate. We'll be talking about this later as well. Don't worry about too many codes. Obviously, when you are starting, you will obviously have too many codes, maybe 20, 30, 40 codes. But then with time, while you are again, since it's an iterative process, while you are going back again to your interviews, something you'll find, okay, these two codes could be merged together, or these three codes actually are talking about same thing. For example, system, procedures, rules, and policies. Initially you have given four codes, but later you identify, well, it's these four things are the same. System, procedures, rules, and policies actually could be rules and regulation. So one code, obviously these four codes combined into one. Now here is a sample, here is an example. What I did was I did a study, or rather, a friend of mine did a study and asked about the problems that university teachers are facing, particular to the tenure track system in Pakistan. So while I was reading through this particular text, I identified that. Uh, Let me read through it. Well, there are few things that are being implemented in Pakistan. In universities, particularly in public sector university, there are two parallel systems. So this particular text or sentence is very important. That public sector universities, there are two parallel systems. Initially, my idea of TTS was a kind of model service structure for teachers, for attracting those people who were more interested in research. The next, rather than teaching and incentivize them and let them work in the university partially with teaching, but their more focused would be on research. That was my idea about TTS. And later then, I also have heard about TTS teachers usually used to get high pay. So these particular sentences, actually what you do is you cannot code, or obviously you'll code the whole sentence or quote the whole sentence, but in order to identify this particular quote, what you do is you give it a code. So what I've done is I found that there is the respondents are talking about parallel system, they're talking about service structure, they're talking about research, then they are talking about pay and benefits, they're talking about uncertainty, and they are talking about anxiety. And yes, this particular thing is, or this particular code can have many codes or many sentences. For example, even in this single paragraph, there are two sentences about research. So this particular code research will have two sentences, one about this, more interested in research, or the whole sentence, and the next thing is about research environment. So a code will have multiple sentences, multiple quotations. And in order to identify or group those sentences, what you do is you identify codes just to represent those sentences. Moving on, what is the process of coding? So in the above example, we have assigned the data some unique codes, and these are or feel unique because short length of the text. But when you are conducting the whole analysis for the 10 or 20 interviews that you have done, you will see that these things will repeat. Every other respondent might have talked about the same thing. So obviously you can use those quotation and put it in that particular code. In larger and complete dataset, you will find that several to many of the same codes will be used primarily or repeatedly. For example, every other person would have talked about research environment, maybe in a different manner, but they will be focusing on research environment. So what you can do is you can put all those quotations there whereby they are talking about research environment into the code of a research environment. or when they are talking about system or parallel system or disadvantages of parallel system, or when they are talking about pay and benefits, they might have talked about pay and benefit in different manner, but actually they are talking about pay and benefit. So what you can do is you can obviously put it in the same code. This is both natural and deliberate. Why it's natural and why it's deliberate? Natural because there are mostly repetitive patterns of actions and consistencies in human affairs. If you are in a single system, if you are working as a TTS professor, or if you are working as a university lecturer in a university, so you will have a certain perception about university social responsibility, and more or less the same perception, or maybe to a certain extent maybe different perception, will be shared by different lecturers. So there will be certain amount of repetition. Deliberate because one of the coder's primary goal is to find these repetitive patterns of actions. And why do you want to find these repetitive patterns? Because when you are discussing your findings, you will talk about these repetitive patterns. You will talk about that, yes, respondent A complimented respondent B, or respondent A, B, and C actually talked about this issue. This highlights the need of this particular issue, problem, or concept, and consistencies in human affairs as documented in the data. So we'll be looking at the example of a write-up as well after the coding and themes emerge. So you'll understand that better over there as well. Another example of coding. Initially, my idea about TTS was model tenure track system, and I would really love to join TTS. Of course, it gave incentives. I was really inspired. But now I feel like joining any system anywhere in Pakistan. So this system or this sentence by another interview talks about pay, benefits, and uncertainty. This text again talks about benefits. It's from another interviewee. This talks about evaluation mechanism. So I've coded it as evaluation. Now, previously, in the previous example, here, this was maybe say interviewee one, and they talked about system, research, pay, benefits, uncertainty. So I identified these codes. Moving on, in another interview, I found the same or more or less the same thing. But their perspective was a little different, but they were talking about benefits. They were talking about uncertainty that the interview one was talking about. So this is how you code, and your code will increase with time, or with analysis of more interviewees or the interviews or the data. While you are analyzing interviewee one, you might have 5 codes. While you start analyzing interview 2, you might have 8 codes, 3 new codes. While you are analyzing interview 3, you might have 10 codes, 8 from previous one and 2 new ones. And those sentences might reappear or might come in different codes. So one code will have multiple quotations, multiple responses from different interviewees. Now, for instance, after doing this, analyzing these 10 interviewees or responses from 10 interviewees, what I did was I identified these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 codes. After analyzing those 10 interviews, I identified these codes. Each of these codes will have multiple quotations, multiple sentences that come from those interviews. I have grouped those sentences into these codes. So, for example, interviewee one was talking about system. Interviewee two also talked about system or parallel system. Or let's say in order to make it easier, in order to further understand it, something very easy. Okay, let's say pay and benefits. So, interviewee one talked about pay and benefits in the universities. Interviewee two also talked about pay and benefits. Interview 3 did not talk about any pay and benefits, but interviewee 4 did talk about pay and benefits. So, what I'll do is whatever they said about pay and benefits, I'll take those sentences and put them or put those quotations or those sentences under pay and benefits. How to do it in the software? That will come later. Now what I've done is, now that, okay, look at these codes. These are 17, 18 codes. The next step is you have to identify, can you group these codes just like you do it technically or statistically in exploratory factor analysis. You have to do it manually in qualitative analysis. So what I've done is I've tried to group these codes. Now my grouping is obviously subjective, and you sitting in your offices or homes will obviously to a certain extent might disagree with my coding, because this is why we call it subjective analysis. That's the reason it's always recommended that once you group these codes into themes, you take it to experts, you take it to your colleagues and ask them what they think about your coding and what they think about your themes. But what I have done here is, the next step is, once you have identified the codes, the next step is that you group these codes into themes. So what I've done is I have grouped the codes parallel system, service structure, reporting mechanism, job switch as job structure. I've grouped evaluation and promotions as performance management. I've grouped research productivity, projects, fundings, and work environment as research and development. I've grouped pay, benefits, retirement pension plans, BPS salary comparison as incentives. And I've grouped uncertainty, anxiety, stress, irresponsibility as job security. Now, it's just not enough to just code them and identify the themes. Now, theme is actually grouping of codes into categories. So what you have done is you have identified a parent, say parent factor to these codes. Now you have to define your themes. So I've given these definitions. Let me just do one here. Job structure. Job structure focuses issues pertinent to parallel job service structures, its reporting mechanism, and issues pertinent to job switch. Another example, let's say job security. Job security points to critical job issues that include uncertainty, that is leading to anxiety and stress due to irresponsible behavior of university management and higher education body. So this is how you define these themes in your study. This is very important, because your failure to define your themes will actually cause problems when you are actually evaluating these themes, linking these themes to your literature, or discussing these themes in your thesis or your research paper. Now we have to relate these themes together. It's not just enough to produce the codes, it's not just enough to produce the themes, it's not just enough to define the themes. It's very important that you relate these themes together. Coding and themes are just part of the analysis. This is not the whole analysis. What is the interpretation? Why are these themes important in this particular context? What do these themes tell us about our research question or the purpose of our research? How are these themes significant? Again, why the aspect of why is particularly important, not just to complete your thesis or write discussion. It's very important because this is how you elaborate the contribution of your study. This will lead to the contribution of your study to the theory as well. How are the codes within the themes interconnected? Do they contradict or complement each other? And finally, how are the codes and themes related to your research question? This is very important. Go back, go back to your research question and see if your codes are actually relevant to the research questions or the research objective. If not, then you have to go back to the drawing board, that whether or not you should have actually coded this or not. So it's in qualitative research you have to go back and forth again and again. So this is okay, yeah, this is where actually we end about qualitative or the concept of qualitative analysis. Now we will move towards analyzing our data in QDA minor light, and I'll be taking the question right in the end. Thank you. So moving on, The presentation will be shared on the website.